I scare you? I scare you? Huh? Yeah, I bet I did. I bet you're like, oh no, I'm so scared. It's okay if you're scared. I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you scared. Okay, so let's keep going with night. We are in the middle of chapter 4, halfway through, so we're going to finish chapter 4 today. So here we go. I will read. Follow along with me, please. You may open up your books if you've got them. You may follow along on the PDF with me. If you're watching on your screen, you can make your screen bigger so that it's easier to see. All right, here we go. A few days before the Poles left, I had a novel experience. It was on a Sunday morning. Our commando was not required to work that day. Only Eidik would not hear of staying in the camp. We had to go to the depot. This sudden enthusiasm for work astonished us. At the depot, Eidik entrusted us to Franek, saying, "Do what you like, but do something, or else you'll hear from me." And he disappeared. We didn't know what to do. Tired of huddling on the ground, we each took turns strolling through the warehouse, in the hope of finding something, a piece of bread, perhaps that a civilian might have forgotten there. When I reached to the back of the building, I heard sounds coming from a small adjoining room. I moved closer and had a glimpse of Eidik and a young Polish girl, half naked, on a straw mat. Now I understood why Eidik refused to leave us in the camp. He moved 100 prisoners so that he could copulate with that girl. It struck me as terribly funny, and I burst out laughing. Eidik jumped, turned, and saw me, while the girl tried to cover her breasts. I wanted to run away, but my feet were nailed to the floor. Eidik grabbed me by the throat. Hissing at me, he threatened, "Just you wait, kid. You'll see what it costs to leave your work. You'll pay for this later. And now go back to your place." A half hour before the usual time to stop work, the capo assembled the entire commando. Roll call. Nobody understood what was going on. A roll call at this hour? Here? Only I knew. The capo made a short speech. "An ordinary inmate does not have the right to mix into other people's affairs. One of you does not seem to have understood this point. I shall therefore try to make him understand clearly once and for all." I felt the sweat running down my back. "A7713. I stepped forward. "A crate," he ordered. They brought a crate. "Lie down on it, on your belly." I obeyed. I no longer felt anything except the lashes of the whip. 1, 2, he was counting. He took his time between lashes. Only the first really hurt. I heard him count 10, 11. His voice was calm and reached me as through a thick wall. 23. 2 more, I thought, half unconscious. The capo was waiting. 24. 25. It was over. I had not realized it, but I had fainted. I came to when they doused me with cold water. I was still lying on the crate. In a blur, I could see the wet ground next to me. Then I heard someone yell. It had to be the capo. I began to distinguish what he was shouting. "Stand up!" I must have made some movement to get up, but I felt myself fall back on the crate. How I wanted to get up. "Stand up!" He was yelling even more loudly. If only I could answer him. If only I could tell him that I could not move, but my mouth would not open. At Eidik's command, 2 inmates lifted me and held me to him. "Look me in the eye!" I looked at him without seeing him. I was thinking of my father. He would be suffering more than I. "Listen to me, you son of a swine," said Eidik coldly. "So much for your curiosity. You shall receive 5 times more if you dare tell anyone what you saw. Understood?" I nodded once, 10 times, endlessly, as if my head had decided to say yes for all eternity. One Sunday, as half of our group, including my father, was at work, the others, including me, took the opportunity to stay and rest. At around 10 o'clock, the siren started to go off. Alert. The Blockhalste gathered us inside the blocks, while the SS took refuge in the shelters. As it was relatively easy to escape during an alert, the guards left the watchtowers and the electric current in the barbed wire was cut. The standing order to the SS was to shoot anyone found outside his block. In no time, the camp had the look of an abandoned ship. No living soul in the alleys. Next to the kitchen, 2 cauldrons of hot, steaming soup had been left untended. 2 cauldrons of soup! Smack in the middle of the road, 2 cauldrons of soup with no one to guard them. A royal feast going to waste. Supreme temptation. Hundreds of eyes were looking at them, shining with desire. 2 lambs with hundreds of wolves lying in wait for them. 2 lambs without a shepherd, free for the taking. But who would dare? Fear was greater than hunger. Suddenly, we saw the door of Block 37 open slightly. A man appeared, crawling snake-like in the direction of the cauldrons. Hundreds of eyes were watching his every move. Hundreds of men were crawling with him, scraping their bodies with his on the stones. All hearts trembled, but mostly with envy. He was the one who had dared. He reached the first cauldron. Hearts were pounding harder. He had succeeded. Jealousy devoured us, consumed us. We never thought to admire him, poor hero committing suicide for a ration or 2 or more of soup. In our minds, he was already dead. Lying on the ground near the cauldron, he was trying to lift himself to the cauldron's rim. Either out of weakness or out of fear, he remained there, undoubtedly to muster his strength. At last, he succeeded in pulling himself up to the rim. For a second, he seemed to be looking at himself in the soup, looking for his ghostly reflection there. Then, for no apparent reason, he let out a terrible scream, a death rattle such as I had never heard before. With open mouth, thrust his head toward the still steaming liquid. We jumped at the sound of the shot, falling to the ground, his face stained with soup. The man writhed a few seconds at the base of the cauldron, and then he was still. That was when we began to hear the planes. Almost at the same time, the barrack began to shake. "They're bombing the Buna factory!" someone shouted. I anxiously thought of my father, who was at work, but I was glad, nevertheless, to watch that factory go up in flames. What revenge! While we had heard some talk of German military defeats on the various fronts, we were not sure if they were credible. But today, this was real. We were not afraid, and yet, if a bomb had fallen on the blocks, it would have claimed hundreds of inmates' lives. But we no longer feared death. In any event, not this particular death. Every bomb that hit filled us with joy, gave us renewed confidence. The raid lasted more than 1 hour. If only it could have gone on for 10 times 10 hours. Then, once more, there was silence. The last sound of the American plane dissipated in the wind. There we were, in our cemetery. On the horizon, we saw a long trail of black smoke. The sirens began to wail again. The end of the alert. Everyone came out of the blocks. We breathed in air filled with fire and smoke, and our eyes shone with hope. A bomb had landed in the middle of the camp near Appelplatz, the assembly point, but had not exploded. We had to dispose of it outside the camp. The head of the camp, the Lageralste, accompanied by his aide and by the chief capo, were on an inspection tour of the camp. The raid had left traces of great fear on his face. In the very center of the camp lay the body of the man with the soup stains on his face. The only victim. The cauldrons were carried back to the kitchen. The SS were back at their posts in their watchtowers, behind their machine guns. Intermission was over. An hour later, we saw the commandos returning in step, as always. Happily, I caught sight of my father. "Several buildings were flattened," he said, "but the depot was not touched." In the afternoon, We cheerfully went to clear the ruins. 1 week later, as we returned from work, there in the middle of the camp, in the apple plots, stood a black gallows. We learned that soup would be distributed only after roll call, which lasted longer than usual. The orders were given more harshly than on other days, and there were strange vibrations in the air. "Caps off!" the Lageralste suddenly shouted. 10,000 caps came off at once. "Cover your heads!" 10,000 caps were put back on our heads at lightning speed. The camp gate opened. An SS unit appeared and encircled us. One SS every 3 paces. The machine guns on the watchtowers were pointed toward the apple plots. "They're expecting trouble," whispered Julik. 2 SS were headed toward the solitary confinement cell. They came back, the condemned man between them. He was a young boy from Warsaw, an inmate with 3 years in concentration camps behind him. He was tall and strong, a giant compared to me. His back was to the gallows, his face turned toward his judge, the head of the camp. He was pale but seemed more solemn than frightened. His manacled hands did not tremble. His eyes were coolly assessing the hundreds of SS guards, the thousands of prisoners surrounding him. The Lageralste began to read the verdict, emphasizing every word. "In the name of Reichsführer Himmler, prisoner number, stole during their raid, according to the law, prisoner number is condemned to death. Let this be a warning and example to all prisoners." Nobody moved. I heard the pounding in my heart. The thousands of people who died daily in Auschwitz and Birkenau, in the crematoria, no longer troubled me. But this boy, leaning against his gallows, upset me deeply. "The ceremony will be over soon. I'm hungry," whispered Julik. At a sign of the Lageralste, the Lagercapo stepped up to the condemned youth. He was assisted by 2 prisoners, in exchange for 2 bowls of soup. The capo wanted to blindfold the youth, but he refused. At what seemed like a long moment, the hangman put the rope around his neck. He was about to signal his aides to pull the chair from under the young man's feet when the latter shouted in a strong and calm voice, "Long live liberty! My curse on Germany! My The executioner had completed his work. Like a sword, the utter cut through the air. "Caps off!" 10,000 prisoners paid their respects. "Cover your heads!" Then the entire camp, block after block, filed past the hanged boy and stared at his extinguished eyes, the tongue hanging from his gaping mouth. The capos forced everyone to look him squarely in the face. Afterward, we were given permission to go back to our block and have our meal. I remember that on that evening, the soup tasted better than ever. I watched other hangings. I never saw a single victim weep. These withered bodies had long forgotten the bitter taste of tears. Except once. The Obercapo of the 52nd Cable Commando was a Dutchman, giant of a man, well over 6 feet. He had some 700 prisoners under his command, and they all loved him like a brother. Nobody had ever endured a blow or even an insult from him. In his service was a young boy, a Papal, as they were called. This one had a delicate and beautiful face, an incredible sight in this camp. In Buna, the Pipe were hated. They often displayed greater cruelty than their elders. I once saw one of them, a boy of 13, beat his father for not making his bed properly. As the old man quietly wept, the boy was yelling, "If you don't stop crying instantly, I will no longer bring you bread, understood?" But the Dutchman's little servant was beloved by all. He was the face of an angel in distress. One day, the power failed at the central electric plant in Buna. The Gestapo, summoned to inspect the damage, concluded that it was sabotage. They found a trail. It led to the block of the Dutch Obercapo. After a search, they found a significant quantity of weapons. The Obercapo was arrested on the spot. He was tortured for weeks on end in vain. He gave no names. He was transferred to Auschwitz and never heard from again. But his young Papal remained behind in solitary confinement. He too was tortured, but he too remained silent. The SS then condemned him to death, him and 2 other inmates who had been found to possess arms. One day, as we returned from work, we saw 3 gallows, 3 black ravens, erected on the Appelplatz. Roll call. The SS surrounding us, machine guns aimed at us, the usual ritual. 3 prisoners in chains, and among them, the little Papal, the sad-eyed angel. The SS seemed more preoccupied, more worried than usual. To hang a child in front of thousands of onlookers was not a small matter. The head of the camp read the verdict. All eyes were on the child. He was pale, almost calm, but he was biting his lips as he stood in the shadow of the gallows. This time, the lager capo refused to act as executioner. 3 SS took his place. The 3 condemned prisoners together stepped onto the chairs. In unison, the nooses were placed around their necks. "Long live liberty!" shouted the 2 men, but the boy was silent. "Where is merciful God? Where is he?" someone behind me was asking. At the signal, the 3 chairs were tipped over. Total silence in the camp. On the horizon, the sun was setting. "Caps off!" screamed the Lageralste. His voice quivered. As for the rest of us, we were weeping. "Cover your heads!" Then came the march past the victims. The 2 men were no longer alive. Their tongues were hanging out, swollen and bluish. But the 3rd rope was still moving. The child, too light, was still breathing. And so he remained for more than half an hour, lingering between life and death, writhing before our eyes, and we were forced to look at him at close range. He was still alive when I passed him, his tongue still red, his eyes not yet extinguished. Behind me I heard the same man asking, "For God's sake, where is God?" And from within me I heard a voice answer, "Where is he? This is where, hanging here from this gallows." That night the soup tasted of corpses. So while I read this chapter here, I'm reminded that this story is a memoir. Okay? It is not like a novel that follows a plot and builds in terms of the plot chart, with the rising action and then the climax and then the falling action. It doesn't quite follow that same pattern. This is a collection of memories. And some of them go together, and they are following a timeline of Ellie's time in the concentration camp. But it's also just a collection of memories. And he is telling us these things. And it's so important for us to read and understand these memories because of how horrible they are. And we don't like to sit and dwell in the horrible. We don't like to sit and just be miserable. But this is a warning. The book is just a warning that humanity can devolve into just utter madness if we are not capable. So one of the things we see with this is that the chapter starts, or the section rather, Ellie is beaten with a whip, and he's tied up, and they whip him 1, 2, 10, 11, 25, and we see the little dots, and that's kind of that suggestion that there's the 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So, all right, there's an air raid. And so the sirens went off. Everyone's expected to hide inside as the planes fly overhead and they drop bombs. So that would be a terrifying experience. And while this is happening, one man is brave enough to crawl out to these 2 cauldrons of soup. Okay? But here's what's interesting. These 2 cauldrons of soup are being unguarded, and nobody is out. And so if you're brave enough, as this one man was, to crawl out, you could eat a bunch of soup. But what is interesting is that these inmates are watching him through the cracks in the wood, or maybe opening the door, maybe through some windows. And they're all watching him. And in their thoughts, they were murdering him. They weren't proud of him. Oh, look at him go. Look at him defy the man. He's going for it. Good for him. They hate him for what he's doing. He's going to get food and I'm not. He's going out there and we're not supposed to. So it's a complex and sad moment of just human emotion and just how irrational it can be. Of course, sadly, as the man crawls out there, a bomb drops and explodes and kills him, and so he does die. But um, so here are some, craters from bombs dropping. So it was, pretty severe damage. It almost looks like the moon there. Every bomb that exploded filled us with joy and gave us new confidence in life. This is kind of darkly ironic, in that it's saying um, that in the midst of all of this crazy death, number one, it might end the war for us. It might kill all the Germans and we might be able to go free. Or it might kill us, but at least we can live knowing that the end might be coming. Like, in the midst of death, they're feeling this confidence in life. It's just, I don't know. It's very darkly ironic. All right. We see the gallows here, and this is an image of a gallows, and manacled is a handcuff. And there are two hangings in this passage. So let's kind of go over the first hanging here a little bit. All right, we see this passage here, and we see the dot, 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 dot. So how are we supposed to read this? What is this supposed to be like? In the name of Himmler, President Himmler, stole during the according to the law, paragraph. Now, some of you might read it like, in the name of Himmler, prisoner number stole during the alert according to the law, paragraph, prisoner number is condemned to death this morning. Example. Okay. So critical readers, what we know here is that the information is being dropped. Some of the information is being dropped. Why is it being dropped? Because nobody cares. No one's paying attention. The big ideas are that someone's announcing that somebody stole something, and so according to their laws, blah, 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 someone's going to die. It's like when teachers or mom and dad talk, and you just hear, wah, 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 wah. Same thing. That's how we are supposed to read that. We don't have to fill in those blanks, but we have to recognize it's a complete thought where certain parts of it are just being dropped because they're not important. We don't really care what the prisoner numbers, like his tattooed number is. We don't care what he stole. We don't care according to what law or what paragraph. So the important part here is the idea of condemned to death and a warning to all other prisoners. So you should kind of hear that like wah wah in your mind in these dropped parts. Okay, so the first hanging, long live liberty, a curse on Germany, a curse, a curse. The executioners had completed their task. So again, critical reading. What happened here? The curse dash. What does that tell you? So, guy's in a noose with a rope around his neck. He's on the gallows, and they knock the chair out. A curse! A curse! Right? The point of the gallows is to snap and break your neck and kill you. So, the body drops as the body is yelling, and that telling us that his yelling was stopped short because of his broken neck. Okay, one of the things we have going on in literature and stories is the idea of parallelism, where we have two ideas that run right next to each other, like parallel lines. Okay, so they're not exactly the same, but they are following a similar pattern. They're following a similar path. So we're going to see this here in a minute, but I remember that I found the soup excellent that evening. So after this man is hanged, Ellie basically is saying, I'm glad it wasn't me. I am so glad I have my life. I am so glad that I can have this soup. This soup is delicious. Yummy. Okay. But then things start to turn here. And Ellie is asking, where is God? Where is he? He is here. He is hanging on this gallows. This is the second hanging of the little Papal boy. And what Ellie is basically saying is, God is dead to me. We ask, where is God? Where is his mercy? Look what's happening around us. Death everywhere. And now we have to watch a little boy be hung. And the boy is too small and he hangs. And he's slowly dying. And they're saying, where is God? How could God allow this? And if there is a God and he allows this, he's not a God that's worth worshiping. There's no God. God is now dead because of this evil in front of us. So they're really having a serious, Ellie specifically is having a serious conflict of faith. So one of your themes that you might mention in a double entry journal. How hard that would be. And on one hand, you can recognize how evil the situation is, and you see no actual presence of God. And on the other hand, to walk away from your faith, to be able to feel like you could reject it like that, that would be a really difficult position to be in. Okay, so here's that parallelism I was talking about. That night, the soup tasted of corpses. Of course, you know that a corpse is a dead body. Now, so what's the same of these two? The night the soup tasted of corpses. I remember I found the soup excellent that evening. So what's the same? Soup. What else is the same? Taste. What's different? Excellent soup. Tastes of death. Did the soup really change? No, probably not. It's probably the same watery broth that they drink every night. It's probably not much at all. It might have a little bit of chicken in it or something, but maybe a little bit of noodles. I don't know. But the soup was probably exactly the same night after night after night. So if it wasn't the soup that changed, what did change? Well, the entire situation. This man here who was hung, okay, I'm glad it's not me, right? He's causing trouble. Okay, he's stealing stuff. But this here, this was a child. This was a child who was so small he couldn't even die right away. And he had to slowly be suffocated by the rope. That's terrible. So although the soup probably didn't change, although the soup probably tasted the same each time, the parallel structure here, that parallel structure of the soup and its taste, and how it tastes excellent and how it tastes like corpses, how those two ideas are very similar. It's the context. The context is like, I'm glad it's not me in the first situation. And then God is now dead because of this horrible, horrible misery. All right. So that takes care of that. All right, ladies and gents, we will talk later. Bye now.